Welcome to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast. It is a spin-off of the website and book review site of Amy's Bookshelf Reviews. Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast is about book reviews, a writer's muse, a book's peruse, author interviews, and literary news. Welcome to the new year, where new things may happen with this. I hope you all enjoy, and thank you for listening.
Good evening, listeners. Excuse me. Good evening, listeners. I'm Amy, and welcome to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews podcast. Today we are joined by an author. Please introduce yourself and let the audience know how they can connect with you.
Okay. Yeah, hi. I'm Donald Firesmith. I do mostly speculative fiction, which includes science fiction, fantasy, paranormal horror, that sort of thing. I also am a software systems engineer with over 40 years of experience, so I also do nonfiction as well. And the best way to get a hold of me, well, first there's my author's website, which should be pretty easy to remember. It's just my name, donaldfiresmith.com. And there you can use the contact information. I am on Facebook and a few other of those places I don't really remember off the top of my head. But go ahead and give me an email or, I'll see you on Facebook.
Great. And I just wanted to mention to our audience that by the time this airs, I will have announced the winner of the short story contest, and you came in third place. I just wanted to mention that while you're on the call with me.
Great.
So what book are you going to talk about today?
Okay, I'm going to talk about my most recent book. It's called The Foundling, Heir to Ash and Blood. It is a fantasy story that takes place in sort of a quasi-medieval 1800s type world, city that has an extremely rigid caste system, and it's about a boy who grows up belonging to the lowest caste because he's was a foundling, abandoned by his parents. The book also includes another short story called The Black Wand, which is pure fantasy based on magic wands, which I also make in my spare time and sell. And I've written a book on magic wands, so it was fun writing a little story that
you make and sell them? Oh, I gotta buy one of those. Definitely, I gotta buy one of those. Can I get them off your website?
I'm not necessarily always up to speed on them because I'm in the process right now of making 10 more that I just have to glue the stones on. I make wands the old-fashioned way with real wood, real gemstones, no resins, no plastics, anything like that.
Oh, that is so awesome. Yeah, I'm definitely going to get me one of those. So you, before the show, you mentioned you have an excerpt you want to read. If you want to go ahead and start that.
Okay. I'm going to read just the very first part of The Foundling, which should give you an idea of what the book's like. Okay, it starts with Chapter 1, Slumtown. My name is Bartholomew Bottom. Bottom because as a foundling with unknown parents, the law automatically assigns me to the lowest caste in our society's rigid hierarchical system. Bartholomew because the director of the West Side Home for Orphans and Foundlings apparently liked the sound of alliteration. Other foundlings my age in the home were Benjamin, Brianna, Bruno, Brittany, and Bella Rosa. And having no families, we all shared the same last name, Bottom. But to the other children and even a few attendants, I was simply Ash. with red hair and a dark red birthmark on my left cheek. Something fire-related was inevitable. The orphans, who lorded over us lowly foundlings, used my nickname as an insult. To them, I was as worthless as the cold, dirty ashes we had to clean from the kitchen stove each evening. I actually preferred Ash over Bartholomew Bottom. It felt less like a curse. Besides, everyone could tell I was the bottom from my tattered black clothes. I didn't need nor want a reminder in my name. Being a bottom meant being trapped forever among the lowest of the low. Deemed unworthy of an education, no one would ever teach me a trade. I had to teach myself to read, largely by reading signs and children's books that I scavenged from the city's sprawling garbage dump. When I was little, I fantasized my parents would show up, apologize, and tell me they loved me. Instead of being a bottom, I imagined I was actually the child of a family of the noble caste, kidnapped as a newborn and abandoned once my parents had paid the ransom. My parents would take me to our home in one of the restricted areas where the ruling class lives life of luxury, and they would love me and I would never be lonely again. But my parents never came, and eventually I grew resigned to my life as a bottom. Once I turned 16 and had to leave the West Side home, the attendants dressed me in simple black clothes that proclaimed my lowly caste to all who saw me. The only legal ways I could support myself were picking through garbage for food and any discarded items that might be worth a few coins to a seller of salvaged goods. Begging was against the law, but we foundlings had to beg if we wanted to avoid slow starvation and the diseases that accompany it. Despite the penalty for theft being the loss of a hand before banishment to the endless desert outside Westburg city walls, I must admit that hunger occasionally drove me to steal from those more fortunate than me. And more than once, I was desperate for food. I earned a few coppers late at night acting as a lookout for local crime lords. Hunger drove some bottoms to prostitution, and I had often been hungry enough to understand why they would resort to selling their bodies for a single meal. But I just couldn't imagine myself stooping that low. There were always other ways to survive. The more desperate bottoms resorted to petty theft and sold the illicit drug oblivion to the lower caste users. Although it gave laborers the temporary escape from the drudgery of their lives, it was highly addictive, and most eventually died from its use. I prided myself on never stooping to the level of selling oblivion for the local crime lord. It was partially out of fear of what the drug would do to me. Oblivion sellers inevitably succumbed to the temptation of sampling their wares. When that happened, you ended up dead, either murdered for stealing from your supplier or from an overdose of the highly addictive drug. But it was more than fear. Life in Slumtown was already a slow death. I refused to help it spread. So, for 7 years, that was my life. I spent hours each day picking through the rolling hills of garbage at the city dump, eating what was not too rotten, and filling my bag with anything that might be of value. After receiving a few coins for the nearly but not quite worthless items I'd collected, I'd buy and eat some day-old brown bread, greasy corn cakes, or a thin noodle soup from a street vendor. I never made enough to save any coins for an uncertain future, but that didn't matter, because someone would surely have stolen them from me while I slept. Then I would go down to the river and wash the worst of the filth and stink off me and my clothes before returning to a room I shared with a dozen other bottoms in an old abandoned building. After an uncomfortable night sleeping on a hard floor with only a few rags as a mattress, I would start the same dreary process over again, with each monotonous day differing little from all that preceded it. Often, in the dark, I wondered why my mother had abandoned me. Was I really such a worthless baby that she could throw me away like the garbage I picked through every day? Didn't I have even just a little value? Was it my birthmark? Did it make me too ugly to keep? I knew I could never answer these questions because she would forever be lost to me. One day I had sprained my ankle and was worried that climbing over the rough piles of garbage would do more damage. So instead of garbage picking, I sat on the sidewalk, leaning my back against the building, begging for coins from passers-by. Being between factory shift changes, when members of the labor caste swarmed the streets and sidewalks, there were few adults, and the street was full of unaccompanied kids playing kickball and other childish games. As usual, almost every adult walked past me without even glancing down at me, for if they didn't see me, they could pretend I didn't exist, and there would be no reason for them to pity me or drop a coin in my cup. It was a day like countless others, but it was the last day of my old life. After 6 hours, I'd collected 3 coppers, barely enough for a small loaf of stale bread, but more than enough to keep me alive for another day. Then I noticed an exceptionally well-dressed and remarkably clean stranger approaching. While everyone else wore the red armband of the laborer caste, this young man wore the distinctive blue armband of a member of the administrator caste. That placed him just one caste below the nobles. I couldn't understand why someone of his caste would be walking in a crowded street in Slumtown. I barely noticed he had reddish hair, much like mine, though not quite as red. After glancing at a piece of paper in his hand, he looked around as if he'd lost his way and was searching for a specific street. I held out my cup as he approached, but he naturally ignored me. I felt slightly disappointed because as a member of his caste, he could easily have parted with the silver had he been feeling especially generous. Then I noticed a rough-looking man following closely behind the young administrator. Living on the streets had heightened my senses. You either develop an intuition to spot danger, or you don't survive. My intuition screamed that this second man was dangerous. The way he kept his right hand concealed in his pocket suggested he was concealing a knife. It was clear he was stalking the young administrator from the way he stared intently at his intended victim's back. I'd never seen him before and was surprised because I thought I knew the faces of all the local criminals. I still can't explain why I didn't just mind my own business. After all, the young administrator was no one to me. Still, something urged me to stand despite the protests from my injured ankle. I followed a few paces behind them. Perhaps it was my curiosity, or maybe it was just that I needed to stretch my legs. Either way, I trailed him for several blocks until the attacker abruptly rushed forward and shoved his prey into a narrow, trash-filled alley between 2 old brick buildings. Cautiously, I crept forward and peered around the corner. As I suspected, the older man held a knife. And that's the beginning of The Foundling, Heir to Ash and Blood.
That is amazing. So I know I love the book myself. So how did you what gave you the idea to write something like that?
Well, I guess I was reading something historical about the caste system in India that used to exist, right, where there were people called the untouchables who had lives pretty much like Ash here. And I thought it would be interesting to take someone from the lowliest of low castes and make him the protagonist of a book and sort of follow him as he enters a completely new and different life, one that he had never suspected that he would ever achieve, one that was against the law, in fact, for him to achieve.
Wow, yeah. I mean, I know about various cultures that they've had that, a societal system of castes and and then they would, the low of the low, that it was like, they didn't exist or they didn't want to exist. And it kind of makes
Right.
sense even today, because it doesn't matter if you're a homeless adult or a homeless child. If they don't want to know about you, they're just going to keep walking.
Yeah, that's the nice thing about speculative fiction, whether it's science fiction or fantasy. You can actually do some commentary on current problems and deal with subjects that are somewhat taboo or at least frowned upon, and get away with it because, after all, it's only fantasy or science fiction. So this book, without trying to be preachy or anything, really takes a look at how unfair a stratified society is, and why it needs to cease existing.
Yeah, I completely understand. I mean, and I like that you have that, he's still a kid, and, the only person he can look out for is himself. So I find that very interesting. Kind of, the way it was, one of my grandmothers, when she was a child, she was born with one leg shorter than the other. And so she was considered a broken child. And this was the 20s. So they would leave her parents, her family would leave her in her high chair all day while they went out and did whatever. And eventually she got put in an orphanage, and she just moved from that to that, because who wants a broken child if they can't do any work? And that's how her parents thought. So this was one of those that it hit home for me, but I think it would hit home for a lot of other people. And you're bringing something to life here that sometimes people just don't want to, they want to keep their blinders on, or, look at life through rose-colored glasses.
Another source, probably in my subconscious, is that I once spent a week in India, in New Delhi, and I was traveling around seeing the sights, and I was going to a Hindu temple, and there were two quadriplegics lying on the street with a cup next to them. And one of them, I'll always remember, he had no arms and no legs. He had no way of moving. He was completely at the mercy of, whoever it was that brought him there and left him there. He couldn't, drink water or, eat food or anything. And everyone would just walk by without, putting a glance, at him. It was just sort of a background sight. The other thing where this may have come partially from is my book, Hell Holds a Slave's Revenge, where I took a young person, and put him into a hellish condition, set of circumstances, and followed him as he evolved, and tried to look at how someone tries to keep their humanity in a world that's very inhumane to them.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, even now people I think they think of humanity as something else than, I don't know, anymore, well, we take one step forward and three steps back. And then we end up where we started, and that's not always a good thing. But, like I said, your work is amazing, and that story is like, Ash became one of my favorite characters. I really enjoyed, I thought it was better than like Oliver Twist, I really did. And I'm a big fan of the classics, but it's kind of like you kind of brought even a hint of that into the story. And I'm not surprised that, that you've been winning awards with this story. It's really, really amazing. So, do you think there'll be another story about Ash?
I've certainly had quite a few people who left reviews on the book say that they want to know more about the at least the world
Right.
that I created. Ash, I think I can write a story about what happens after the end of this book,
Right.
but I can also go back and deal with what happened before between Ash's mother and Ash's father and what caused Ash to be abandoned at the orphanage.
Right. Because maybe even though Ash doesn't know, but the reader could know.
Right. And it is a good, interesting to note that although this book only came out July 1st, it already has won 3 awards. It won an Excellence in Literature Award from One Tribune, and the Chrysalis Brew Project, which is a major organization in Australia, it won a Seal of Excellence Award and became one of the July Reader's Choice Award winners.
Oh,
And
that
I'm
is
hoping
so
that,
amazing.
I'm hoping that other places where I've submitted it will view it as kindly.
Yeah, definitely. I couldn't find anything, it was great writing. It was a great story. Ash is an unforgettable character, and he's, from the bottom to the top, it doesn't matter, him going somewhere in between, especially, if you take a step up from your caste, that you're breaking the law. And I know that comes from, that stuff really happened, and in some places probably still happens.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. In fact, this is one of the things that I often do. I'll have a concept for a story, and I'll come up with a situation or a world or some kind of environment, and I will then put characters in that situation and see how they act, how they evolve over time.
I like that. Yeah. Because I think that not a lot of people realize that setting and environment is also a character as well, because it affects what characters do. I mean,
Right.
if you put someone who has never seen snow and then you send them to Alaska, how would they survive? Something like that. It's or it could be something outrageous or scientific, paranormal. It doesn't matter, but whatever environment they're in, and you're like, okay, here you go. It's kind of like I think it's one of the great ways to tell a story, because it's environment driven, but it's also character driven, and characters, just like people, react in different ways in different situations, just like people do. Like when I have conversations with my sons, it would be different. I'm like their mom, even though they're grown. But if I had a conversation, well, like I'm having with you, it's not the same thing. It's another version of who I am, who you are, and whatever environment we're in, we react as well. And or whoever we're talking to, if we're talking to a boss or we're talking to an employee, things are always going to be. It's not the same way that you communicate and act and react in certain situations.
It was interesting in Ash's case to take someone who has a certain amount of street smarts, but is incredibly ignorant of just about everything, especially anything outside of Slumtown. So he doesn't know anything about manners or how the rest of the world lives in any detail. And so he ends up being put in an environment that he quite literally knows nothing about. And it's a real shock to his being to go from a terribly bad place that he knows very well to a better place that he knows really very little about. And then also the nicer place isn't completely nice. There are, dangers and things like that in the nicer part of town that he's totally unaware of. So I could tell the story of the different parts of town and the different casts of people through Ash's eyes, so that, I could sort of look at those people and how they live their lives with a totally, new point of view, without, and showing how he, reacts and tries to understand this new world that he's in. And that was a lot of fun, being able to see through the eyes of someone who's learning all of this stuff from the very beginning, and he has to learn it quickly.
Yeah, it's like, we always think, if we look at, oh yeah, if I was rich, I would have a better life, or things like that, or, for one, you never know what's happening outside of closed doors. And if you're only aware of your own environment, and then you're put someplace that you don't know about, and I think any of us can do that, going someplace for the first time that we've never been, it could, really raise an anxiety. Even educated people, you could still get that anxiety about going somewhere or doing something that you have never done before. And especially for a kid like Ash, whose education just came from Slumtown.
Yeah, a lot of books that are fantasy, the hero basically understands the environment that they're getting into, more or less. And whether it deals with magic rings or dragons or whatever, they're not really getting into as radically a different new world as Ash does. Right. And that was something that I really enjoyed in writing his story, was to just see somebody dealing with the complete unknown to them. So it wasn't just a happy fairy tale and everything ends, great. Right. And everything goes well for the hero. He's not like the hero that just sort of pulls a sword out of a stone and everything goes great for him.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really why Ash, this book is something that I think that everybody should read, because it's important. So I'm just going to wrap up right now, but I'm really grateful and thankful that you've been on the show again, and I can't wait to have you on here again and again.
Anytime. I'm very happy to be on your show.
Well, I really enjoy our conversations. So for the audience, if you wish for you or your book to be on the show, go to amysbookshelfreviews.com/podcast. Thank you for listening. Be safe, be well, and always be kind.
Thank you for listening to Amy's Bookshelf Reviews. If you are looking to be on the podcast or looking for a book review, you can go to amysbookshelfreviews.com and look for the appropriate navigational menu. Again, thank you all for listening and being a supporter of this podcast and of the Amy's Bookshelf Reviews, professional reviewers of books and audiobooks. Thank you all. Be safe and be well.